The space around Council Station Harmony had been quiet for 3 days. The giant station floated in the darkness, like a massive metal city. Its lights twinkled peacefully as alien diplomats inside argued about pirates and criminals who were hurting innocent people across the galaxy. The talks had been going on for months, but nothing had been decided yet. Then the silence broke. 3 large shapes appeared out of nowhere. The emergency alarms on the station began screaming as massive human warships materialized right in front of the surprised aliens. The ships were huge and dark and covered in scorch marks and debris from recent fighting. Pieces of destroyed enemy vessels hung from their hulls like gruesome decorations, telling the story of a violent battle that had just ended. Admiral Park Min-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Vengeance. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, though none of it was his own. His face was hard as stone, and his eyes burned with the fire of someone who had seen too much suffering. The bridge around him buzzed with controlled chaos as his crew worked with deadly precision checking systems and preparing reports. Bart Min-ho was not a tall man, but his presence filled the entire bridge. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the authority of someone who had just led his people through hell and brought them back alive. His hands were steady on the command console, even though they had been gripping weapons just hours before. The weight of command sat easily on his shoulders because he knew his cause was just. The second ship in the formation belonged to Captain Lee. Sujin, her vessel, the UES Thunder, had taken heavy damage during the fighting. Large holes in its hull had been quickly patched, but the emergency repairs were clearly visible. The ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder, but it was still flying and still ready for another fight if necessarily. Sujin was younger than Park Min-ho, but just as determined. Her ship had been in the thick of the heaviest fighting, and her crew had performed like heroes under impossible conditions. She had lost good people during the battle, but she had also saved hundreds of innocent lives. The trade was worth it, but the cost still weighed on her heart like a stone. Her voice crackled over the communication system as she reported to the admiral. Her words were professional, but anyone who knew her could hear the exhaustion underneath. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, leading her people through one of the most complex military operations in recent history. Her ship carried battle scars, but her spirit remained unbroken. The third and smallest ship was commanded by Kim Tae-ho, his vessel. The UES Guardian was designed for speed and stealth rather than heavy combat, but it had played the most important role in the entire operation. His cargo hold was filled with rescued prisoners, men, women, and children from dozens of different alien species, all saved from certain death or worse. Kim Tae-ho was the youngest of the 3 commanders, but his skills as a pilot were legendary among the human fleet. He could make his ship dance through asteroid fields and slip past enemy sensors. Like a ghost, his specialty was rescue operations, and he took pride in never leaving anyone behind. His crew shared his dedication, and they had risked their lives countless times to pull innocent people out of impossible situations. The rescued prisoners, huddled in the ship's medical bay and passenger compartments, they came from 12 different species, and their conditions ranged from merely frightened to severely injured. All of them bore the marks of their captivity, but they were alive and free. Thanks to the courage of their human rescuers, many of them had given up hope of ever seeing their families again inside Council Station. The alien diplomats pressed their faces against the viewports and stared in shock at the human fleet. The 3 ships hung in space like predators that had just finished hunting. The evidence of recent combat was impossible to ignore. Plasma burns scarred their hulls, debris from enemy ships decorated their surfaces, and the smell of battle still seemed to cling to them even in the vacuum of space. The Zelthari ambassador was a tall, blue-skinned being whose 4 eyes could see across multiple spectrums of light. He had been studying the human ships for 10 minutes, and what he saw terrified him. Damage patterns told a story of incredible violence, but also of surgical precision. The humans had fought like demons, but they had also been careful to protect something or someone during the battle. The Corvin delegate resembled a giant insect, with metallic wings that caught the station lights. As they trembled with nervousness, his species were warriors themselves, but they fought for territory and resources. What the humans had just done was different. They had fought for principles, for the protection of those who could not protect themselves. This made them unpredictable and dangerous in ways that traditional warriors were not. Other alien representatives whispered among themselves in dozens of different languages, but the fear in their voices was universal. They had all heard stories about human military capabilities, but seeing the evidence firsthand was something else entirely. These three ships had just accomplished what the entire Galactic Council had been unable to do for years. The human fleet had been hunting the Crimson Fang pirate organization for 6 months. The pirates had been terrorizing trade routes and raiding colonies across 17 star systems. They took prisoners for slaves, conducted horrific experiments on their victims, and sold weapons to the highest bidders. The Council had formed committees, written reports, and scheduled meetings, while innocent people died every day. Park Minho had grown tired of the endless debates and bureaucratic delays. He had requested permission to act against the pirates 17 times and been told to wait for proper authorization each time. Meanwhile, the death toll climbed higher, and the pirates grew bolder in their attacks. Something had to be done. And if the Council would not act, then humanity would. The human strike had been swift and brutal. 3 coordinated attacks on the main pirate bases had destroyed their entire fleet in less than 12 hours. The pirates who surrendered were taken prisoner, while those who fought to the end were granted the death they chose. The rescue of captured civilians had been the primary objective, but the complete destruction of the pirate organization was a welcome bonus. Now the human ships sat outside Council Station like a challenge to everything the aliens thought they knew about warfare and justice. The hulls were still warm from weapons fire, the rescue pods were still being unloaded, and the smell of victory hung around them like perfume. The 3 commanders stood ready to explain their actions, but they showed no shame or regret for what they had done. The Council had been debating the pirate problem for 8 months, while the humans had solved it in 8 days. The contrast was impossible to ignore, and the implications were staggering if humans could act this quickly and effectively when they chose to. What did that mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Park Minho checked his chronometer and nodded to his communications. Officer, it was time to dock with the station and face whatever consequences awaited them. He had no doubt that some council members would be angry about the unauthorized military action, but he also knew that results spoke louder than words. The rescued prisoners were proof that human methods worked, even if they made alien diplomats uncomfortable. The 3 ships began their approach to the station. Docking bays moving with the same precision they had shown in battle, the crews prepared for what might be their most difficult mission yet, explaining to a room full of aliens why sometimes the most civilized action is to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The Great Council chamber stretched out like a massive cathedral made of crystal and metal. Representatives from 47 different alien species filled the curved rows of seats that rose up from the central floor. Each species had their own section with specialized atmosphere controls and seating designed for their unique biology. The chamber normally buzzed with the sound of diplomatic conversation, but today an uncomfortable silence filled the air. Ambassador Talar of the Zelf delegation stood at his species viewing platform. His 4 blue eyes focused on the screens, showing the human ships outside. His tall frame trembled slightly as he watched the damage assessment reports scrolled across his personal display. The humans had just destroyed an entire pirate fleet in a matter of hours, accomplishing what his own people had deemed impossible without massive casualties. The Zelthari were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible intelligence and careful planning. They could calculate the probability of success. For any military operation, down to the smallest detail, their war computers could predict battle outcomes weeks in advance, but they had never encountered anything like human combat doctrine. The humans seemed to thrive on chaos and turn impossible odds into stunning Victoria. Stiller had spent his entire career studying military tactics and strategy. He understood the science of warfare better than most beings in the galaxy, but the human approach made no sense to him. They fought with a combination of careful planning and wild improvisation that should have led to disaster. Instead, it had led to complete victory with minimal friendly casualties. The mathematical models simply could not account for the human factor. In the insectoid section of the chamber, the Corvin delegate Shisk clicked his mandibles nervously. His metallic wings caught the overhead lights as they vibrated with anxiety. His compound eyes could see the human ships from 17 different angles simultaneously, and what he saw disturbed him deeply. The damage patterns on those hulls told a story of violence beyond anything his warrior species had ever imagined. The Corvin were proud fighters who had conquered dozens of worlds through superior tactics and overwhelming force. They understood the art of war and respected strength above all other qualities. But the humans fought for reasons that had nothing to do with conquest or personal gain. They risked their had read the preliminary reports about the human rescue operation. The tactical data showed that the humans had deliberately chosen the most dangerous approach to each pirate stronghold because it gave them the best chance of saving civilian lives. They had sacrificed tactical advantages to protect people they did not even know. The Corvin mind struggled to comprehend such behavior. Near the center of the chamber, the massive form of Delegate Goroth represented the stone-skinned Vandari. His species were known for their patience and their ability to think in terms of centuries rather than years. They had watched the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations and prided themselves on their long-term perspective. What the humans had just done, the Vandari had been dealing with the pirate problem for over 50 standard years. They had formed committees, studied the issue from every angle, and developed comprehensive long-term strategies that would eventually solve the problem in another century or two. The human approach of immediate, decisive action went against everything they believed about proper governance and careful planning. Earth shifted his massive weight, causing the reinforced floor to creak under his bulk. His rocky skin showed stress fractures that appeared when he was deeply troubled. The humans had just proven that sometimes quick action was better than careful planning, and this revelation challenged the foundation of Vandari philosophy. Their entire approach to problem-solving might be fundamentally flawed. In the atmospheric tanks designed for the aquatic Nereid, Delegation 3 representatives floated in their specialized breathing fluid. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly, showing extreme agitation. The Nereid were peaceful by nature and had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. The sight of the battle-damaged human ships filled them with a mixture of admiration and horror. The Nereid had been some of the loudest voices calling for action against the pirates because their ocean worlds had been frequent targets for slave raids, but they had always imagined that the solution would involve negotiation, economic pressure, and diplomatic sanctions. The idea of solving the problem through violence had never seriously occurred to them. Their representative Coral Song had been one of the first to receive reports from the rescued prisoners. Overwhelming odds to reach captured civilians had moved her to tears. Her people owed their lives to these strange, violent, gentle beings who seemed to embody contradictions. The reptilian Saurian delegation sat in their heated section of the chamber, their cold blood requiring extra warmth to maintain proper brain function. Their leader, his speaker, had been following human military doctrine for several years as part of his research into emerging galactic powers. What he had learned both fascinated and terrified him. The Saurians were ancient and wise, having developed space travel when most other species were still discovering fire. They had seen the rise of many warrior races over the millennia, but none had ever combined such devastating military effectiveness with such strict moral codes. The humans seemed to be able to switch between compassionate healers and ruthless killers, depending on what the situation required. His speaker had studied the tactical reports from the pirate raids and found them almost impossible to believe. The humans had simultaneously attacked 17 different targets. Each strike force had been outnumbered by at least 3-1, but had achieved complete victory with minimal losses. The level of training, skill, and courage required for such an operation was beyond anything in recorded history. The gaseous beings known as the Ethereal Collective floated in their containment fields near the top of the chamber. Their translucent forms shimmered with colors that reflected their emotional states, and right now, those colors showed deep concern mixed with grudging respect. They communicated through electromagnetic pulses that most other species could barely detect. The Ethereal had been among the strongest supporters of peaceful solutions to the pirate problem. Human approach of solving problems through violence seemed primitive and barbaric to their advanced sensibilities. But the results could not be argued with. The humans had accomplished in one day what the Council had failed to do in years of debate. Ethereals struggled to reconcile their peaceful philosophy with the undeniable effectiveness of human methods throughout the chamber. Similar scenes played out as each species tried to process what they had witnessed. The humans had just demonstrated a level of military capability that shifted the balance of power in the galaxy. But more than that, they had shown a willingness to use that power not for conquest or personal gain, but for the protection of innocent life. Viewing screens around the chamber continued to show images from the human ships. Rescue pods being unloaded, medical teams treating injured prisoners, and battle. Weary human soldiers sharing their food with alien children they had just saved. The contrast between the violence of the recent battle and the gentleness of the rescue operation was striking. Dr. Song Yuna appeared on one of the screens as she helped. An elderly Zelthari female down from a rescue pod, the human doctor, moved with infinite care and patience as she examined the former prisoner for injuries. Her gentle touch and kind words transcended the language barrier as she provided comfort. To someone who had given up hope of ever being free again, the alien representatives watched in fascination as the human medical teams worked with rescued prisoners from dozens of different species. The humans had clearly studied the biology and psychology of every major galactic race in order to provide proper care. This level of preparation and compassion impressed even the most skeptical. Observers Captain Li Sujin appeared on another screen as she supervised the unloading of supplies. For the former prisoners, her ship had taken heavy damage during the fighting, but she had made sure that her crew saved space for food, medical supplies, and comfort items for the people they rescued. The human priority system clearly placed the welfare of innocent civilians above their own comfort. The chamber remained silent as the alien delegates absorbed what they were seeing. The humans had just rewritten the rules of galactic politics through a combination of overwhelming force and unprecedented compassion. The old ways of committee meetings and diplomatic negotiations suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of such decisive action. As the viewing screens continued to show the aftermath of the human operation, one thing became clear to every observer: the galaxy had changed forever, and there was no going back to the old ways of doing business. The humans had arrived, and their methods would force every other SP. The massive doors of the council chamber hissed open with a sound like escaping steam. Admiral Park Min-ho stepped through the entrance with the confident stride of someone who had nothing to hide behind him. His combat boots clicked against the polished crystal floor in a steady rhythm that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. The fabric was torn in several places, and dark stains marked where he had helped wounded prisoners during the rescue operation. He carried himself like a man who had just saved hundreds of innocent lives and was proud of what he had done. Behind him came Captain Li Sujin, her own uniform bearing the marks of recent combat. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years in zero gravity, but there was also a hardness to her movements that spoke of battles fought and won. Her ship had taken the heaviest damage during the operation, but she had brought every. Kim Tai-ho followed last, his smaller frame carrying the weight of command just as easily as his larger companions. Directly, but his eyes held the same determination, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who had personally carried wounded. The alien representatives watched in fascination and fear as the humans took their positions. They had seen military officers before, but never ones who radiated such quiet confidence and moral authority. Entered the room above them all, the Prime Mediator floated on crystalline wings that caught the chamber lights like prisms. When he spoke through the translation devices, the sound echoed through the chamber with formal authority. The Prime Mediator, the importance of following proper procedures and respecting established authority, his words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable while making it clear that he considered the human actions to be dangerous and illegal. He accused the humans of violating 17 different interstellar treaties and protocols. He listed each violation with precise legal language that made the human rescue operation sound like an act of terrorism. Rather than a humanitarian mission, his voice grew stronger. As he detailed the potential consequences of allowing individual species to take justice into their own hands, in their seats, the formal charges sounded serious when presented in legal language, but everyone in the chamber had seen the results of human action. Still, during the entire speech, his hands remained at his sides and his expression never changed. He was a man who had spent his life protecting others, and he was not used to being lectured about the morality of his actions. When the Prime Mediator finally finished speaking, the chamber fell silent for a long moment. Making eye contact with representatives from dozens of different species, his gaze was steady and unafraid. Then he spoke, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber without any need for amplification. His words were simple and direct. Without the flowery language of diplomacy, he spoke like a soldier, reporting to his commanding officer, but with the moral authority of someone who had seen to formations and procedural questions, hundreds of innocent people had died in pirate raids. Underneath was unmistakable. He told the chamber about the children who had been separated from their parents and sold into slavery. He described the medical experiments that had been conducted on helpless prisoners and the weapons testing that had used living beings as targets. His words painted a picture of horrors that made several alien representatives physically ill. The human admiral explained that his people had a simple philosophy. Was always better than discussion when people were dying. He acknowledged that the human strike had been unauthorized, but he made it clear that he would make the same choice again without hesitation. Captain Lee Soo-jin stepped forward when Park Min finished speaking. Her voice was softer than his, but carried the same steel underneath. She began to describe the tactical details of the rescue operation with the precision of someone who had planned and executed one of the most complex military operations in galactic history. She explained how the human fleet had spent months gathering intelligence on the pirate organization. The operation had been planned down to the smallest detail, with contingencies for every. Watched in amazement as she explained how the humans had coordinated. The level of planning and execution was beyond anything most species had ever attempted. She described how each strike team had been specifically trained for their target location. The humans had studied the layout of every pirate base and practiced their assault routes until they could execute them perfectly in complete darkness. Her crews had risked their lives to ensure that no innocent prisoners were harmed during the fighting. The captain explained that the human fleet had deliberately chosen the most dangerous approach to each target because it gave them the best chance of saving civilian lives. They had sacrificed tactical advantages and accepted higher risks to their own people in order to protect strangers from species they had never met before. A commander, Kim Tae-ho, stepped forward to display footage from the rescue operations. The screens around the chamber showed human soldiers fighting through heavily defended positions while carrying wounded prisoners to safety. The footage showed human medics treating injured aliens with the same care they would give to their own people. The violence of the combat and the gentleness of the rescue operations was striking. The humans had clearly spent considerable time and resources preparing to save people they had never met. What they had seen and heard, the evidence, was overwhelming and undeniable. The pirate, both necessary and effective. Park Min-ho spoke again, his final words ringing through the chamber with absolute conviction. He told the alien representatives that humans would always choose to save lives over following procedures. They would always act to protect the innocent, regardless of political consequences. This was not a threat, but a simple statement of fact. About human nature, the chamber remained silent as the implications of his words sank in. The humans had just announced that they would continue to act according to their own moral code regardless of what the council decided. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. The chamber doors opened again, and this time the sound was softer, more gentle doctor song. Yuna entered the great hall with careful, measured steps, the quiet dignity of someone who had seen the worst of what intelligent beings could do to each other and had dedicated her life to healing the galaxy. They moved slowly, many still bearing the visible marks of their captivity. Some leaned on walking supports while others were pushed in specialized medical chairs. In their eyes, that came from experiencing horrors beyond imagination. Dorsong Yuna helped each prisoner to their designated seats with infinite patience, making them feel like specimens under examination. She spoke softly to each one in their own language, offering words of comfort and encouragement that transcended the barriers between species. The alien representatives in the chamber watched in fascination as the human doctor worked. She moved between species, as different as the aquatic Nereid and the rocky Vandari, with equal skill and compassion. Galactic race, in order to provide proper medical care. Elderly Korvan, female, was the first to speak. Her metallic wings were damaged and would never carry her in flight again, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had been a teacher on her home world before the pirates captured her, and her voice still carried the authority of someone used to commanding attention and respect. She described months of torture and experimentation in a voice that shook with emotion but never broke. The pirates had been testing new weapons on living subjects, trying to find ways to cause maximum pain without causing death. She had watched friends and fellow prisoners die in agony while she waited for her own. How she had given up all hope of rescue after the first month in captivity. The pirates had told their prisoners that no one was coming to save them, that the council was too weak and divided to take action against them. The psychological torture had been almost as bad as the physical abuse. Then one day the lights went out and explosions echoed through the corridors of the pirate base. Human soldiers appeared like avenging angels, fighting through impossible odds to reach the prisoners. The elderly Corvin described watching in amazement as humans threw themselves into deadly situations to protect people they had never met before. She spoke of how the human soldiers had shared their own food and medical supplies with the rescued prisoners. Even though their own resources were limited, the humans had given up their comfortable quarters so the former captives could rest and recover, showing a level of selflessness that she had never encountered before. Young Zelthari male, barely more than a child by his species standards, spoke next. His blue skin was marked with scars from medical experiments, and his 4 eyes held pain that no child should ever have to experience. The pirates had been using him to test new torture devices, because his species' nervous system was particularly sensitive to pantha. Young Zelthari showed the chamber documentation that the pirates had kept of their experiments, designed to cause maximum suffering while keeping the subjects alive for future testing. The alien representatives gasped in horror as they saw the clinical precision with which the pirates had conducted their research. He described how the human rescue team had found him strapped to an experimental table scheduled for execution the next morning. The pirates had grown tired of his usefulness as a test subject and planned to kill him in front of other prisoners as a warning. The humans had arrived just hours before he would have died. The boy told of how a human soldier had cut him free from the torture device and carried him to safety. Even though the base was under heavy attack, the soldier had whispered words of comfort in broken Zelthari, reassuring him that he was safe now and that no one would ever hurt him. Again, an adult Nereid floated in a portable water tank as she gave her testimony. Captured during a raid on her ocean world, the pirates had taken her and dozens of other aquatic beings to use as test subjects for underwater weapon systems. She explained how the pirates had forced the aquatic prisoners to test breathing apparatus and underwater vehicles that were designed to fail. The pirates wanted to study how different species died in underwater. Her fellow prisoners drowned in experimental devices while she waited for her own turn to come. The psychological torture of watching others die while knowing she would be next had broken many of the stronger prisoners, but she had somehow managed to hold on to her sanity. She told the chamber how human divers had appeared in the flooded sections of the pirate base, moving through the water with skills that rivaled her own people's, to save prisoners they had never seen before, showing courage that defied understanding. A massive Vandari male spoke from his reinforced seating. His strength made him valuable for heavy labor, but they had quickly discovered that Vandari were also useful for testing the durability of various weapons and restraint systems. He would strap him down and fire various energy weapons at him to see how much damage his stone-like skin could absorb before failing. Of how human soldiers had blasted through the reinforced walls of his prison cell using explosives that should have killed him in the confined space. But the humans had calculated the blast precisely to destroy the walls without harming the prisoner inside, showing a level of tactical skill that amazed him. He spoke of how the humans had treated him with respect and dignity from the moment of his rescue. They had brought specialized equipment to treat his injuries and had made sure he had proper food and rest during the journey to safety. The contrast with his treatment by the pirates was overwhelming. Other prisoners gave similar testimonies, a clear picture of an organized criminal enterprise that had been conducting experiments on living beings while of the chamber, their small forms dwarfed by the alien architecture around them. They had been separated from their families and were being prepared for sale to the highest bidders when the humans arrived to rescue them. Their song Una spoke for the children, explaining that many of them were too traumatized to testify publicly, but that their medical records told the story of systematic abuse and preparation for slavery. The human doctor voice was calm and professional, but the anger underneath was unmistakable. She displayed medical scans that showed evidence of surgical modifications. The aliens had been experimenting with ways to make their captives more valuable as slaves, including neural implants that would make them more obedient and surgical alterations that would make them better suited for specific types of work. It was always the same. The pirates had been far more organized and cruel than anyone had realized, while the humans had shown. His diplomatic training had taught him to choose his words carefully, but the moral weight of what the chamber had just heard gave his voice an authority that transcended political rhetoric. He spoke like a man representing not just humanity, but all civilized beings everywhere. He reminded the council that they had been established to protect the innocent and maintain peace throughout the galaxy. He asked them to explain how allowing mass murder and slavery, while debating proper procedures, fulfilled that sacred mission. His words cut through the political atmosphere, and committees, the results spoke for themselves, regardless of whether proper procedures had been followed. Only if that system was actually capable of protecting innocent life. When bureaucracy became more important than saving lives, humans would always choose to act rather than debate. The chamber remained silent as the weight of the testimonies and the ambassador's words sank and the evidence was overwhelming and the moral argument was impossible to refute. The council chamber erupted into chaos as soon as Ambassador Choi Woo-sung finished speaking. Representatives from 47 different species began talking at once, their voices mixing into a cacophony of sound that the translation devices struggled to process. Some aliens stood at their platforms, gesturing wildly, while others remained seated, but spoke with passionate intensity. The smaller species, those who had been frequent targets of piracy, were the first to voice their support for the human actions. The aquatic Nereid delegate Coral Song spoke with bioluminescent patterns flashing rapidly across her translucent skin. Her people had suffered countless raids over the years and had begged the council for protection that never came. She pointed out that her government had submitted over 200 formal requests for military assistance in the past 5 years. Every request had been referred to committee, where they disappeared into the bureaucratic maze of the council system. Meanwhile, her people continued to die, while politicians debated the proper way to save them. The diminutive pixel representatives, who resembled small furry mammals, spoke next in their high-pitched voices. Their homeworld had been completely depopulated by pirate raids 3 years earlier, and the survivors had been living as refugees ever since the council had offered them sympathy and temporary housing, but no action against those responsible. They declared that the humans had accomplished more in one day than the council had managed in decades of meetings. The pirates who had destroyed their civilization were dead and could never hurt anyone else again. Justice had finally been served, even if it had come from an unexpected source. Insectoid Vex delegation clicked their approval, using sound patterns that resembled applause. They were a practical species who valued results over process, and they had been growing increasingly frustrated with the council's inability to take decisive action. The human approach of swift, violent justice appealed to their direct nature, but the larger, more established species were not as supportive. The ancient ethereal collective floated in their containment fields, pulsing with colors that indicated deep concern. Their representatives spoke through electromagnetic waves that created an otherworldly voice. When translated, they argued that allowing individual species to take justice into their own hands would lead to chaos and the breakdown of civilized society. The humans had achieved good results, but they had done so by abandoning the rule of law that held galactic civilization together. If everyone followed the human example, anarchy would result. The massive Titan delegation agreed with the ethereal concerns. Their representative was a being the size of a small building, whose voice shook the chamber when he spoke. The Titans had helped establish the council system centuries ago, and they believed strongly in the importance of proper authority and legal procedures. They pointed out that the human actions, while successful, had bypassed all established chains of command and ignored dozens of interstellar treaties. If every species decided to act unilaterally based on their own moral judgments, the entire system of galactic governance would collapse into warring factions. The crystalline prism beings spoke through harmonic frequencies that created beautiful music when translated, but their message was equally concerned. They had spent millennia developing the complex diplomatic protocols that kept different species from destroying each other in war. The human approach threatened to undo centuries of careful progress. The debate continued for hours with passionate arguments on both sides, the chamber filled with the sounds of alien languages, mixing together as representatives tried to make their voices heard above the chaos. Some species walked out in protest, while others demanded immediate votes. On various proposals, Admiral Park Min-ho stood silently in the center of the chamber, listening to the arguments swirling around him. His face showed no emotion, but those who knew him could see the growing impatience in his posture. He was a man of action who had little tolerance for endless debate when the issues were clear. Captain Lee Soo-jin and Commander Kim Tae-ho flanked him, their own expressions showing similar frustration. They had risked their lives to save innocent people, and now they were being lectured about the importance of following proper procedures by beings who had done nothing while civilians died. Finally, Park Min-ho requested permission to speak again. The chamber gradually fell silent as the alien representatives realized that the human admiral wanted to address them. His voice when he spoke was calm and measured, but carried an edge of steel that made everyone listen carefully. He told the assembled delegates that he had listened to their concerns about proper procedures and legal authority. But he had a simple question for them. How many innocent beings had died while they debated the correct way to save them? He let the question hang in the air for a long moment. Before continuing, the admiral explained that humans had a fundamental philosophical difference with the approach taken by the council. When faced with a choice between saving lives and following procedures, humans would always choose to save lives. The political consequences were irrelevant when innocent people were suffering. He acknowledged that the human approach might seem chaotic and dangerous to species who valued order and stability above all else. But he pointed out that their ordered approach had failed to protect anyone, while the human chaotic methods had saved hundreds of lives in a matter of days. Park Min-ho told the chamber that humanity was not seeking to overthrow the council or destroy the existing system. They simply wanted that system to actually work, to protect innocent life. When the system failed to function, humans would act to fill the gap regardless of political sensitivities. Captain Lee Soo-jin stepped forward to add her voice to the discussion. She spoke about the tactical capabilities that the human fleet had developed during their anti-piracy campaign. The techniques and technologies they had created could be shared with other species to make future operations more effective. She offered to train military forces from any species that wanted to learn human combat doctrines. The humans had proven that small forces using proper tactics could defeat much larger enemy formations. The key was combining careful planning with the willingness to take calculated risks to protect innocent life. Kim Tae-ho spoke about the rescue and humanitarian aspects of their operations. He explained how they had developed new medical techniques for treating trauma victims from different species and how they had created mobile medical facilities that could be deployed rapidly to disaster areas. The three humans made it clear that they were offering to work within the council system, but only if that system was willing to change to become more effective at its primary mission of protecting innocent life. They would not apologize for saving people, while others debated the proper way to do it. The prime mediator finally called for order in the chamber. Using his authority to silence the various debates and arguments, he announced that the council would take a formal vote on the human actions and their future role in galactic security. The question was not whether to punish the humans, but whether to officially recognize their methods. Three options were presented to the delegates. The first was to condemn the human actions and demand that they submit to council authority in all future operations. The second was to ignore what had happened and continue with business as usual. The third was to formally recognize the effectiveness of human methods and invite them to lead future security operations. The debate that followed was intense but more focused than the earlier chaos. Representatives knew that their vote would determine not just the fate of the human fleet, but the future direction of galactic civilization. The old system of endless committees and procedural delays was being challenged by a new approach based on rapid, decisive action. The Zelthari delegation surprised many by supporting the human approach despite their usual preference for careful analysis. Their representative explained that sometimes mathematical certainty had to give way to moral necessity. The humans had proven that immediate action could be more effective than perfect planning than voting. The process took several hours as each species caucused internally to decide their position. The smaller species who had suffered from piracy were almost unanimous in supporting the humans, while the larger established powers remained divided on the issue. When the final votes were tallied, the result was closer than many had expected, but the human proposal had passed by a narrow margin. The council had officially recognized that sometimes the most civilized action was to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The final vote echoed through the council chamber like thunder as the prime mediator announced the results: 237 votes in favor of the human proposal, 186 votes against, and 24 abstentions. The margin was narrow, but decisive enough to change the course of galactic history forever. Admiral Park Min-ho remained perfectly still as the numbers were read. But those who knew him could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The vote was not just about approving human actions, but about fundamentally changing how the galaxy approached the protection of innocent life. The old system of endless debate had been replaced by a new doctrine of rapid response. The chamber buzzed with excitement and concern as representatives began to understand the implications of what they had just done. The smaller species who had suffered under pirate attacks celebrated openly, while the larger established powers worried about the precedent they had just set. The balance of galactic politics had shifted permanently. Captain Li Sujin stepped forward when the Prime Mediator called for the implementation details of the new policy. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber as she outlined the structure of what would become known as the Rapid Response Fleet. This new organization would have the authority to act immediately against clear threats to civilian populations without waiting for lengthy approval processes. The fleet would be commanded by Admiral Park Min-ho, with human officers holding most of the senior positions, but representatives from other species would be welcome to join and contribute their own expertise. The emphasis would be on action rather than discussion, with military efficiency taking priority over political sensitivity. Li Sujin explained that the human approach to warfare was based on three fundamental principles. Speed was essential because every moment of delay cost innocent lives. Precision was required to minimize collateral damage and protect the people they were trying to save. Compassion was necessary to maintain the moral authority that justified their actions. Other species could contribute ships, personnel, and resources to the fleet, but all crews would be trained according to human military doctrine. This meant accepting a level of risk and aggression that made many alien commanders uncomfortable, but had proven effective against organized criminal enterprises. Kim Tai-ho was appointed as the fleet's chief of rescue operations, responsible for developing new techniques for extracting civilians from dangerous situations. His experience in the pirate raids had shown that successful rescue missions required specialized equipment training, and most importantly, the willingness to risk everything for strangers. The rescue protocols developed by Kim Tai-ho would become standard throughout the fleet. Every operation would prioritize civilian safety above military objectives, even when this made the mission more difficult or dangerous. This approach went against traditional military thinking, but had proven its worth in the field. Dr. Song Yuna received appointment as the fleet's chief medical officer and humanitarian coordinator. Her role would be to ensure that rescued prisoners and trauma victims received proper care regardless of their species or origin. She would also oversee the development of new medical techniques for treating injuries and psychological trauma across different alien biologisty. Medical facilities designed by Dr. Song Yuna would be mobile and adaptable, capable of treating dozens of different species simultaneously. Her teams would be trained not just in alien biology, but in alien psychology, understanding that healing required more than just repairing physical damage. Ambassador Choi Woo-sung negotiated humanity's full membership in the Galactic Council, along with permanent seats on both the Security Committee and the Ethics Board. This gave humanity significant influence over future policy decisions and ensured that their voice would be heard in all matters relating to galactic security. The human diplomatic approach emphasized results over rhetoric and practical solutions over theoretical discussions. This style was refreshing to many smaller species who had grown tired of the endless debates that characterized traditional council proceedings. The establishment of the Rapid Response Fleet marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. The old system, where committees studied problems for years while people died, was replaced by a doctrine of immediate action, guided by moral principles rather than political convenience within. The first month of operation, the new fleet received volunteers from 18 different species, all eager to learn human military tactics and humanitarian principles. The combination of deadly combat effectiveness and genuine compassion for innocent life proved attractive to beings who had grown frustrated with traditional approaches to security. Corvin sent their best pilots, who were amazed by human fighter tactics that emphasized individual initiative and creative improvisation over Rigid formations, the insectoid warriors learned to fight not just for territory or resources, but for the protection of those who could not protect themselves. The aquatic Nereid contributed their underwater combat specialists who worked alongside human divers to develop new techniques for operations in liquid environments. The cooperation between species that had previously had little contact created unexpected innovations in military that had opposed the human proposal began to contribute resources to the fleet. The Zelthari provided advanced sensor technology that helped identify pirate bases and slave markets, while the ancient Saurians shared their knowledge of long-range strategic planning. The 3 human ships that had started this revolution remained as the core of the growing fleet, but they were no longer alone. The U's Vengeance became the flagship of a multinational force dedicated to protecting innocent life. Throughout the galaxy, the scars of battle that marked its hull were now symbols of hope rather than just evidence of violence. The success of the Rapid Response Fleet led to dramatic changes throughout galactic society. Pirate attacks dropped to almost zero within 6 months as criminal organizations realized that swift and overwhelming retaliation would follow any attack on civilians. Trade routes that had been dangerous for decades became safe. Again, the psychological impact was even more significant than the military results. Innocent beings throughout the galaxy knew that someone was watching out for them and would come to their aid if needed. The sense of helplessness that had characterized civilian populations under the old system was replaced by confidence and hope. The Council itself began to change, as the human example influenced other areas of galactic governance. Committees that had existed for decades without producing results were disbanded and replaced. With action-oriented task forces, the emphasis shifted from following proper procedures to achieving positive outcomes. Species that had previously been marginalized because of their small size or limited military power found their voices heard. For the first time, the new system valued moral authority and the willingness to act over political influence and economic power. The galaxy became more democratic and more responsive to the needs of ordinary beings. The cultural exchange that resulted from the multinational fleet created unexpected friendships and alliances. Human soldiers shared meals with alien crew members and learned about their customs and beliefs. In return, the aliens learned about human concepts of justice, courage, and self-sacrifice. Star Song Yuna established medical exchange programs that allowed alien doctors to study human techniques. While human medics learned about the unique biological needs of different species, the cross-training created a generation of medical professionals who could treat any species effectively. Success of the human approach vindicated those who had argued that sometimes the most civilized action was to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the willingness to protect innocent life at any cost. Admiral Park Min-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship 6 months after the historic council vote and watched as ships from dozens of species conducted joint training exercises. The fleet had grown from 3 damaged human vessels to over 200 ships. Representing every major civilization in the galaxy, the sight filled him with pride, but also with determination. The work was far from finished, and there were still beings throughout the galaxy who needed protection. The Rapid Response Fleet would continue to grow and evolve, but its mission. Day humanity arrived at the Council with ships. Still dripping blood had marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The galaxy would never again tolerate the systematic abuse of innocent life, while politicians debated proper procedures. The humans had shown a better way, and that example would guide galactic civilization for generations to come.